call to order the special meeting of the Village of Franklin Council, focusing on our strategic planning. Let's do a quick roll call, Dana.
We don't do a roll call for.
We don't do it? Okay, thanks.
All right, so,
I love having a parliamentarian, you don't have to think.
All right, Meg, floor is yours.
all right. So what we have tonight is going to be like a whirlwind. We have new members. We're talking about projects that have been long-term projects for council. What I've done is go through and compile some of the most relevant information to each one of these priorities. We're going to kind of hustle through. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to introduce the topic and the previous priority, give a little bit of background. The goal for today would be to just really listen and ask some of the basic questions. We're taking a real 10,000-foot view. We're not diving into the nitty-gritty. Now today, Susan's going to be recording all the questions that we have. So if you have something that's a more detailed question that isn't designed for this workshop specifically, we will respond to those. We're going to put out a Q&A afterwards, and we will go into that. So go ahead, Dina, if you want to just get us started here. So purpose of this session is coming into Franklin. We have a number of projects that we've either started or talked a lot about and haven't really moved them over the finish line. We are in budget season right now, and we'll schedule some further budget discussions at our next meeting later this evening. Today, what I'd like to do is just give you some information over these topics, take some general questions, and hopefully we can start to decide on what our goals and priorities are going to be for the next year. There's no decisions need to be made tonight, no votes. It's really just more of an educational seminar to get us all caught up. Thank you, Dana. Can I get the next slide? So again, high level, we're 10,000-foot view. We're just going over some of the specifics, but we're not diving into any technical details. But there is going to be a follow-up after tonight. So like I said, we'll have a couple more study sessions to talk about. The Finance Committee is going to be meeting regularly, and we're going to provide you with Q&A for any detailed questions we didn't get to today. And then we'll continue the conversation from there. So without further ado, well,
Just a
Yep.
process question, you had just caught a question in your voice, and with regards to the priorities,
Mhm.
which I think what you're gonna do is talk to us about funding them, or some aspect of funding them in the budget. What do you see as a deadline, or when will we have agreement in the council on the priorities for the coming year?
that's a good question. So at our April meeting, that would be another opportunity, our regularly scheduled meeting to discuss things. We also have 2 special meetings that we'll be scheduling tonight for the
Okay.
budget. Those would be the meetings where we would make more decisions, talk more technically about ideas for where we're at, and move forward with that. By the end of our second study session, we need to have those decisions kind of tampered down. So my goal right now is to have a budget to be presented to council, to be passed hopefully by council in May, and that gives us a little buffer if we need it. Historically speaking, we've been running right up to our June deadline, which by charter we have to have adopted a budget. That's caused a lot of chaos and confusion to where we're changing things at the last minute or passing a budget that immediately needs to be amended. So in order to mitigate that, the budget season here will have a few study sessions so that the night that we bring the full budget, council's had opportunities to have study sessions, Finance Committee has, we've answered lots of questions, and then the night of May, we are comfortable with where we're at in the budget. From now until that point, anytime you have a random thought in your head or a question or you'd like some follow-up information, please shoot me an email. All those emails are going to be compiled and then distributed to everybody. So it'll be in a Q&A format. Pam Hansen asked this question, we got this information, and it's on the sheet and it'll be sent to everyone. We will have to be communicating you'll have to be communicating with me outside of these meetings because we have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that I'm able to answer your questions as we move forward. So think of this as sort of the start in the budget process. I would say in a typical year where if I had been, working with you throughout the year and not new, we would have started this conversation in January. And that gives us lots of time to kind of field through everything. Unfortunately, with timing, this is the earliest that we could get this to you. But moving forward, we hope to have this a lot sooner.
Thanks.
We can't really take questions like that, but we can open it up for public comment. It's just not a back and forth with the
That
public.
meant to be, it's a process question. The charter, you mentioned the deadline, the charter says the first Monday in May. Must have the approved budget. So I know in the past, and the ground, may not comply with that, but the charter does say first Monday in May, the budget must be adopted.
Because I know it was adopted last June, so,
Yeah, and I don't remember us ever doing that, but it doesn't matter for right now. I know.
Yeah.
I want to.
okay, so the first project that I have identified, we hear a lot about, we've already put funding on, is the sidewalk. Dana, next slide. What we had in 2022 was HRC give us an estimate for a sidewalk from Telegraph to Inkster across 13 Mile. The initial study was to put the sidewalk on the north side of the road, which is just naturally more accommodating to this project. At that time, the cost estimate was between $3 and $4 million. In your packets, you'll see the full initial engineering that was done. So there was substantial investment already made by the village to HRC in order to produce these documents. Next slide there. In 2024, it came back to, and council had requested same sidewalk, but look at it on the south side of the road. The south side increased the cost of the project significantly due to the fact that just the natural layout of the ground was going to require a lot more work to construct the sidewalk on that side. And the most important thing, so it took the estimate between $3 and $4 million to about 5.8. However, that's a very conservative number because, and if we were to move forward with putting the sidewalk on the south side of the road, a number of easements would need to be granted. So if those aren't willingly give, they would have to be purchased, and that would definitely require additional funds, and that has not been included in this budget. So if we were to look at pursuing this moving forward through the rest of the year as a priority, we can expect that the project would exceed about $6 million. And that public engagement would need to happen. We would need to be having the first step, talking to the residents who would be needing to give up the easements and see if there is interest and appetite over there, talking to the residents to see about, the feasibility of the sidewalk in the sense of who's going to use it, is it something that's supported? So I would say that public engagement would need to begin before we put any more funding towards this project particularly, because we've already paid for all this initial engineering. So we would assess the, resident support and try and get a feel for if the easements would even be what we would assume attainable. So in your packet under the sidewalk section, you're gonna have the 2022 study and engineering for the north side, followed by the 2024 study and engineering for the south side with those cost estimates, but just know that those are subject to change. Does anyone have any high-level questions that as it pertains to sidewalks that I could help answer there? Yes.
This 6 million number is for the north side, which is better.
South side.
South side.
Okay.
North side was 3 to 4 million, but that was 2 years ago, so call it 5. It's just gonna go up, and again, both of them didn't have any easements considered. But the north side, the project on the north side is, it does have a cost benefit to the south side.
Easement wise, are there more easements we have to attain on the north side or the south side?
South side,
Okay, because there's less homes on the north side of 13 Mile.
yes. Less individuals
Not
that
every,
we
not
would need
every
to.
property on the south side needs an easement.
No,
It's
but,
like, it's easily a handful, but it's not every.
and the cost increase, again, isn't for the
Yeah.
easements, it's just
Right.
because of the way that the
Inflation.
land is,
Either one would work.
Mhm.
And ideally, we're trying to get people from the south side to the north side to then get downtown. People that live on the north side already can get
Right.
downtown. But we also needed somewhere for everyone on the south side to traverse along in order to make that cut in.
and that can be a
So-
really tricky corner there, and as far as
I'm
like,
talking about I'm talking about 13 Mile Road.
oh, yeah,
So It's, during rush hour, everything's busy, but in general, it's not hard to perpendicularly cross a road.
Yep,
It's traversing the shoulder and that serving as a sidewalk, which is the dangerous piece. So if it's on the north side and that's the only way to do it, it'll still function, but I think the ideal is do it on the south side.
and bring them over and to the north side there.
But then you do still have to have strategic points to cross, because it has to line up with the street, whereas if the sidewalk's on the north side, you could cross at any point and then traverse wherever you want to get, whether it's good downtown or just a friend that lives on the north side, so, okay.
Yes.
Two questions. So I'm seeing in some of these renderings that there's like improvements to intersections. Does that include, because those would be points to cross, is that including any sort of crosswalk or signage around like pedestrian crossings?
No, the cost wouldn't include that because that would have to be a county participation. So any sort of traffic signal or signage there would have to come from the county. So you can expect that those would be additional costs, because I'm sure that those would be costs that either, maybe the county would be able to help fund, but we would still be required to put forth funding. And we haven't even approached the county at that point yet, but that's a good question. You could expect the cost to increase with those things as well.
Good dovetail, because the second question is, David, you and I talked a long time ago about if building sidewalks or any sort of infrastructure, because it like hits a number of different municipalities like that, you know, we're starting to get into Southfield, and then if we even take these sidewalks further than that, we're starting to get into Farmington Hills, and then is there any opportunity in addition to, what I was gonna say, customer engagement, citizen engagement, that we also start a, opportunity to engage municipalities or county officials as part of this
That's
project?
definitely in the plan, to try and make them multi-jurisdictional, which is much more appealing to the county. And yeah, if we put a sidewalk from Inkster all the way to Telegraph, that sidewalk now actually goes all the way to Southfield Road.
Correct. And, then I'm thinking too, like 13 Mile now is a detour for the 696 construction. Might there be any benefit to, like, the timing of this because of that? Like, just went for a walk with my dog today, had to wait nearly 5 minutes to cross the street on 13 Mile. Is there like a safety issue? Could that be something that is involved in this sort of funding ask?
I think that could definitely be a component, because we do see an increased traffic there. So is it even feasible to construct a sidewalk when an incredible amount of traffic is being routed down 13 Mile? Timing wise, we wouldn't be able to get it up and done before 696 opens back up.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
totally understand that. I just mean like, hey, we can illustrate that there is
Yeah.
a significant amount of traffic happening on 13 Mile to justify.
That could definitely be part of it. So when you get into county and when you're working with the road commission, they would be the ones we would pay to have them come do a traffic study. Because the traffic increase is temporary due to the 696 closure, they would take that into accountability. So I don't necessarily think that it would bolster our, argument to get support for that. However, we can see definitely for our residents, it's a perfect time to engage it as to why it could be needed over there. As far as looping in other municipalities, I think that those conversations would need to happen right after we had engaged our residents. But funding is gonna be an issue, so everybody's already in their budget process. You can assume that you wouldn't get any budget allocations for this year from any of the surrounding governments, but for the following year, that could be possible. There isn't available funding right now to fund this project, but maybe throughout the rest of the year, something becomes available. So, these are things that we're looking for, but as far as building into our 25-26 budget with any support, we wouldn't necessarily be able to count on any other communities for that. Now, I do think the road commission would be able to support a portion of that project, but how much it would, I wouldn't know that yet.
Have we explored prior to, or I guess something for the council to consider as well as, while we plan the sidewalks on 13 Mile, the possibility of talking with the road commission about just doing the crossings, right? So we know the major crossing points that could potentially be a safety measure for what you're talking about as far as timing. Okay, 696 is closed. We have residents who regularly walk. Is there a potential for us to put in those, pedestrian lights on 13 Mile to allow for the safe crossing of pedestrians? That doesn't necessitate us having a sidewalk, but is some actions we can start to take.
So before engaging the county, I would want to make sure that we are clear on what we would be able to
Yeah.
financially support and where we're at with that project. Because it's definitely that's their space. They would control that ultimately. And typically in the past, working with the county, the first thing they're going to come out and do is a traffic study. I know we've had traffic studies previously to try to improve the crossing there, and it's been determined that they have the light and the crosswalk, and that was what they thought was necessary. Now, the conditions have changed with more traffic over there, and it could be possible, even, sometimes those are temporary too. Sometimes it's just a temporary crossing that they could put in, and that is something we could ask the county about. The first step would be to engage with them and have them come out and do a traffic study and see what they would be able to do over there. But absolutely a conversation that can be happening if we are focused on prioritizing this goal. I mean, today what you're gonna see is we have some expensive projects, and the other thing is we have 4 staff members. So money is definitely always, a barrier, but so is staff time and resources. And what I'm trying to mitigate is having us chase a bunch of projects and have us just complete a couple and then move on to the other ones there. So if sidewalks ends up being a priority, I definitely think engaging with the community right away, but also the county would be initial steps.
I agree with what you're saying about the county and in how you're talking about approaching them, because they'll be looking for cost sharing for sure. But I'd like to make sure that I'd like to know what you're thinking about with regards to along Franklin Road, because our village limit is 12.5. I read in this 13 Mile Road, are you thinking about that last half-mile stretch of sidewalk on Franklin Road?
I haven't been. I am choosing projects that you guys have already been in the works for. This has already, because that wasn't part of these initial discussions, that's not something that I've even thought about yet. These are projects that we put $20,000 of engineering into without knowing the answers to these questions. So I'm bringing you projects that you've already, for the most part, started to talk about or vet. And so in the research that I was doing that would have happened previous to me, I hadn't seen any discussion about that section. And so I haven't even thought about how that would play into this project.
Thank you for that. I seem to recall somewhere that there was some preliminary engineering work done to help us decide, for example, what side of Franklin Road the sidewalk should be on south of 13 Mile. And whatever we decide, I would just like to know, in my mind, we were coupling 13 Mile and that remaining stretch. Because what we did was 14 to 13, and then this is what's left from the main artery standpoint. And we couldn't do Franklin Road south of 13 Mile because it was a budget issue. We just had to scope it. So
Why did we not
why didn't we do it?
engage HRC to include that?
I thought we did.
these? No.
We didn't, okay. Then somebody did something, because there was a set of pros and cons presented to us a couple of years ago on what side of
It's in
13,
here.
what side
I
of...
believe that
It's in
It is?
the
I thought-
HRC memo with the pros and
It's got a
cons are
boardwalk
in
running
there.
along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in here.
Oh, all right, fine, I didn't.
It's the last page.
Oh,
It's
all
the
right.
map that looks
Okay.
like that.
Concept along Franklin Road.
Okay, fine, as
Oh.
long as it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a good point, because I think that what's really important is coming in, I've worked here for a couple of months now. This information is really difficult to locate. We have not done a good job at previous to being here of having it on a server. Yes, if it's in a public meeting, it's in an agenda somewhere, but there isn't a good way for me to access that.
Okay.
So to even compile this, I exhausted all of our files, all of our paper files, any paper that would have been given to me initially, all of Roger's emails that I could still get a hold of, anything that had been transferred to me. So it is possible that longstanding members of council will remember something that had come up that I'm not able to locate. Let's talk about it. If you can remember a time frame of when it might happen, maybe I can find it in an agenda. Obviously, that's not my practice moving forward for keeping things accessible, but this information was difficult to kind of locate, so it is possible that I don't have something that you would have seen a couple of years ago.
And I have old files on the streetscape. Let me just, I'll look in my box
That's
as
great.
well. I'm sorry?
I've got something this thick on.
Yeah,
That would
I
be
thought-
great.
Okay, so,
Be-
with some, I mean, with some of us, maybe there's something in everybody's box.
Agreed, because I've exhausted my access to the information that I have in
Okay.
this. All right. Anything else on sidewalks before we move on to pathways and connectivity?
No, but I just do want to highlight one point that you made at the end there. So regardless of any of the dialogue today, thank you, because that's a ton of work. I mean, for you to distill it down into this packet, I mean, it's a lot of work that's not reflected here, so thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Staff and I have been hustling on this to give us a little foundation here to move forward, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah.
So when we moved to pathways and connectivity, huge discussion in Franklin for many years, you know, and it went from the council to the planning commission to council, the planning commission back to the council. So what you're gonna have in your packet is just a combination of information. So the first thing is that gets referenced all the time is this map of 8 identified pathways. What I can tell you about this is that I hear residents reference this. I've heard it referenced in planning commission, and I think it's important to say these were suggested for a specific grant that was applied for in 2021. We did not receive that grant. These pathways were not vetted for constructability. They weren't vetted for connectivity. They were identified by engineers at HRC as what they thought would be good to build this project for this specific grant funding. So while we do have some research and we have some work, over the years, we've identified that a number of these 8 pathways aren't really going to meet a long-term connectivity plan and might not be that viable. I bring it up and it's in your packet because it is something that's referenced a lot, but a lot of time has happened since this had come through, and it was to serve a very specific purpose that didn't come to fruition. So it's time for us to refresh the way that we talk about pathways and to really focus on what we have vetted for constructability and where we're at on that. So long-term discussion, and you know, initially I heard lots of support for pathways for many years. To call everyone's attention to it, 2 months ago, a planning commission member did an independent survey of her neighborhood about pathways. And that sparked a lot of negative community engagement about pathways. A lot of people have come out of the woodworks saying that, you know, they're not necessarily in support of that idea. The only reason that I bring it up, because I know we have a lot of support for pathways, is these things need to be vetted in the community. We have to do community engagement on them, educate the community on them, take feedback, and that's really the first step for all of these projects that I can see that we're missing. So pathways and connectivity could be great in Franklin. We have started this discussion for a long period of time. What you're gonna see on the connectivity map that we talked about, where they were the possible pathways, we've talked about them, but they were not vetted for constructability. Next slide for me, Dana. Thank you. So where we did get, and that what does have movement, is this Irving Trail proposal. Mostly between the last 2 years, we've been talking about the Irving Trail. It is a trail of an easement that the village had owned, or had access to for quite a while, and we looked at the different requirements that might be necessary to make that a maintained walking path. Next slide. During this discussion, which would have happened sometime over the last 2 years, 3 options were proposed for the Irving Trail, and the costs for those are here. None of these included any easements. Now, we have had some of the neighbors in the area be very cooperative and just have engaged in talks with us in HRC about easements and sound like they would be willing to grant them, but just always keep that in the back of your mind there. So you'll see these here. I can tell you what page these start on.
Yeah, thank you.
They're after the planning memo, which is just a recap of where the pathways had been in planning. So page 43 of your packet is going to start these. You're gonna see the design, cost analysis, and the same for the third one. So you can look at the different paths there and what they were offering and the cost there. So if we were to move forward with these projects, we would especially finish up the Irving Trail, which if you haven't been down there to look at it, go look at it. You can actually walk in that area. We have an easement over there. It's not paved. At this point, we don't maintain it, but it is accessible. So it's a great place to go walk and to look. If we wanted to take it to the next level and really solidify it as a path and maintain it, these are some of the cost analysis that we had there. I think it would be the path that we're the furthest along the way for, the first one that I would suggest moving over the finish line. And that was the most recent engineering that we had done on pathways was involving this. So that's kind of where we were at with that.
So could we get just like, so I have the three options in front of me, but
Yep.
I'm trying to put that up against our map.
Yep, they're all in the same section there, and they're gonna be in,
Like where Irving meets Wellington?
yes, what section is that?
Well, no, because Apple Tree's up
It's over
north.
by Captain's
Here's-
and Grant, oh, I see it.
One thing you need to understand between these three projects, okay? The first one, that where the pink line dips to the west, whatever that is,
Yep,
and then the
Page
second one,
43.
where it dips again, and then the third one, it goes straight. So, the third one that goes straight, I believe, is option 3.
yes,
But that's the only place where we have an easement.
correct.
In these other ones, it goes outside the area we have easements, and all but one of these people has been supportive of granting that easement. And
Correct.
the one person who doesn't want to grant the easement to make it go dip, that little horseshoe dip, makes it become option 2.
Yes,
So,
Thank you.
What does it connect?
yeah, that's
So what
my
street
question.
is- Are we
This is a
connecting?
huge connection, just so you know.
Yeah.
I use this is the only way people that live where I live, and you either gotta go left on Inkster Road and fight traffic to get to Scenic, or go right and fight traffic to get to Garden Way. This takes you directly from Garden Way to Captain's Lane. Literally takes you downtown.
I'm gonna get to go drive.
Garden Way.
I really need help with this one.
This is.
Garden Way isn't labeled on this
identified.
map, but
I'm
it
sorry,
runs.
Apple Tree.
Okay.
Okay,
Garden
so,
Way comes and connects to Colony Hill.
yeah, when you're looking at your
Apple
map,
Tree.
does
and-
that mean that this map isn't actually reflective of what the road? Can you right now drive down Apple Tree and get to?
Yes.
yes,
Well, yeah.
it dead ends, take,
It's a dead end. Yeah. We own we used to own right away there. There was supposed to be a street that went left, and there was supposed to be a street that went right. It used to be Irving Road. I mean, but it was unbuildable. It was supposed to connect to Captain's Lane,
No. I still am struggling to,
really.
So it's Ovid Court, Willow Green Court, your guys' is that end, you can
Guys,
walk behind
Guys,
it.
you need to be looking at this. What are you looking at? You need to be looking at this.
I
And I'm
understand,
trying to
but
orient
that, I'm
myself
trying to
on
orient
where it
myself
is
on the
here.
map.
Yeah.
Oh, on here, yeah, it's Apple Tree and Colony Hill. And
Yeah.
it connects you basically from this neighborhood
to the,
Can you
to
draw?
this neighborhood.
So
This neighborhood,
it eliminates your
Basically
need
right
to
here.
walk on 14 Mile, right? 13 Mile, or Inkster or 14 Mile, right?
We'll just let him mark it.
Is that
and
the
then
whole
we-
trail?
yeah, the whole trail is 325 feet.
Could I see what was marked? And then could you hand me my pen and then I'll mark mine?
So again,
So
at
it's
one
where?
point, this was a
Where is that?
dedicated right of way. We owned this land, and we used to walk, it had a path that's been walked through it traditionally, which is where this pink line is.
And how did that erode?
Huh?
What would happen to it?
we gave it back.
Vacated.
We vacated it,
Vacated it to these owners.
Intentionally?
yeah.
Yeah, so now these owners now own to the middle line of that. But when we
So-
did that, the village council that, at the time,
It's not even.
Yeah.
reserved an
that's-
easement,
Okay.
but they just took an easement down the middle.
Oh,
Even though the existing path didn't run down the middle. The existing path runs where the pink line is.
Yeah, I got that.
To make it run down the middle makes you go into a wetland area and a low area. But the issue was, one of the owners that owns a significant portion of this had issues with options 1 and 3. Because in both of those instances, the trail after you get to about this point is just running down the center of what is now his long driveway, but at one point was our road on which his long driveway existed. And he doesn't want people to still walk down the center of the driveway, which is easy because it's already paved and we don't have to improve it. He wants to move it into another area outside of that, which entails
And that's why you
constructing
see that huge cost difference.
another
there.
70,000 square feet, dollars worth of sidewalk. So if we just kept it, if we just did number 3
Yep,
and kept it in its existing location, nobody can say anything, nobody has to give us any easements, and we'll have to spend a few dollars to straighten out this dip sort of where the yellow is. And that's why it goes from 54 to 78, because option 1 would just be repaving the pink line. But to go to move the horseshoe of the pink line to the yellow line and make it go straight is another, at the time, $25,000. Because you gotta put up a little retaining wall and it goes down into a mucky area. Probably gotta take out some band soil, bring in some compactable material. But that's why 1 and 3 are kind of viable, but you really can't get 1, because to get 1, the person really wants 2.
we wouldn't be able to we don't have a good feeling that we'd be able to necessarily easily obtain the easement we would need for option 1.
Yeah.
So that would bump you
Without
really
moving the
into.
balance of it to create option 2.
Right.
So really, option 3, when I've been talking with the HRC, so I come in, all of these options have already been laid out and this work has already been done. And HRC feels
Option 3's
strongly that option 3 could be very feasible. We have a lot of the work already done. Where we were kind of at is, we need to figure out and make sure that, that the neighbors were, on board, which we were. But we had HRC trying to obtain easements and spending their time as our consultant working on a project that we didn't even have budgeted yet. So when I came in, I put a pin in that and just said, no more work on this until we get some real direction on what we want to do with that. But a lot of the groundwork's already been laid. It's you can walk the trail right now. I think it would be a good place to start if trails and connectivity become a priority. When you're looking at grant funding, when you're thinking about this on a massive scale and about opening up pathways around, you need to be thinking about connectivity. That's the only way that they're going to get funded. One-off trails are not going to be a very fundable project, so we'd have to be really thinking about how they're all connecting. If we were to do some sort of, massive pathway study, that those are the type of things that they would be looking for. So, pathways could be a good focus.
sorry, for this one, so page 31 is really a good close-up to show, right, David? The bottom of page 31.
Yeah.
Like, if
Yeah.
we did this trail, this connectivity wouldn't really need to happen. Page 31. Because, it would
Apple tree?
accomplish the same purpose.
Correct.
Like taking
pretty much.
taking Willow Green and
Kind of,
Ove.
not entirely, no.
You still have to work
No.
on Inkster.
You still have to get along Inkster. So if you just want the Reader's Digest, when planning dove deep into this, and this came to planning when I was chairing it at the time, initially we eliminated 4, 5, 7, and 8 right off the get-go as totally not necessary. All they did were created interconnections to a bunch of people that already had access to downtown without having to interconnect between neighborhoods. The only ones that we considered as important were 6, because the people on Rosemond are completely landlocked from everywhere. Ovid and Wellington, Ovid and Willow Green was an only because it only served a few people, and you can walk along Inkster to get to Scenic, or walk along Inkster to get to Colony Hill and then use that path. 2 can be done in 30 seconds. It's a simple connection between the existing sidewalk that crosses over from the north side of 14 Mile Road to Dennison, just to get to the Crestbrook path. It's 100 feet of sidewalk, should have been done years ago. 8, oh, again, yeah, 8's gone. And then 3, all those people that live in that neighborhood, if they wanted to go downtown, can. There is a sidewalk on Telegraph, if you wanted to walk along Telegraph, and then all the way along 14 and all the way around. But if you wanted to, you could connect from Cromwell Tudor and go right to Suzanne, and then get.
See, to
a lot
me,
quicker.
like, I want to know more about these, how many households do they serve? What is their option if we don't do it? Like, I know the people on McKinney are landlocked. They have to walk along 13 Mile without a sidewalk to then cross and to go downtown. Tudor, Cromwell, Franklin Farms, walking along Telegraph, even as an adult, is very dangerous.
It feels dangerous, even though there's a 5 or 6 foot.
I think it is
It's
in
really
actuality.
scary.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with you.
And so like, to me, it's like, not all of these connections are equal. Some of them serve 300 homes and some of them serve 30 homes, you know? So to me, it's kind of like, I would rather put the money towards a connection for multiple homes than a connection for, you know, a few homes, just because I think that as a representative of, you know, thousands of constituents, we have to try to allocate resources that are already limited, and doing that to serve the most people is something that, you know, we should be looking at, because some of the ones that may not cost a lot may not serve a lot of people, or they have other safe options. Like, that's where I'm looking at, like, what is the safety factor? Like, you know, Hersheyville, okay, so it's a dead end, but like, now they have a sidewalk, so like, does 5 really do anything anymore? You know, with the
Right.
sidewalk, like, I live on Meadow, like,
It
I don't
doesn't.
think 5 is a connection point anymore. People on Briarcliff know how to traverse the neighborhood, so like, 5 is no longer even
So,
contemplation.
This map is really outdated. People in this
It was
village
pre-streetscape.
reference this map all the time. This map was created for a grant that we didn't even get funded. And so the reason that it's here today is not to say, let's go back to this map. It's to say, this map does not serve its purpose anymore. We cannot be referencing this map as a guideway to pathways because it doesn't fit the need anymore. If pathways were a focus for council, they could engage HRC to do a map that actually showed for constructability and connectivity. That would be a significant investment, but that would be the first step in developing a connectivity plan, I would think. So maybe that would be a budget item. If you had a full connectivity plan that was vetted for construction, which is not what we have here, then you could possibly use that for funding in the future too. But those would be things that would need to be budgeted for to go ahead and move forward with.
Well, understand, if we just put the sidewalks in on Inkster and 13 and Franklin, we don't need any of these.
We still need
With
the
these-
Cromwell, Tudor, Franklin Farms one.
Well, again, technically not. You could walk along Telegraph, but yes, that one has been the highest on our priority list. It's the one we've been asking planning to make an immediate action item, and happens to be the one where a gentleman has come in recently and said, I'm totally against it.
Yep.
And I think the neighbors, that's where I live, and I think the neighbors, you know, would like to see some, I think it's worthwhile looking, but to your point, what I found helpful about this is just, it shows the whole village and possible sites for connectivity. I agree with you that it needs to be updated, but I think Angelina made a good point. There's some criteria that we would need to establish and agree on before we were to commission a new map,
Yes.
even.
Yep.
She was using, you know, numbers of people that would be impacted. I think cash out the door, fixing long-term, or there might be other criteria. So, you know, I find this very helpful. Finally, we're looking at this thing as a whole project possibility.
So a good place to start if Pathways was something that we were gonna prioritize would be to engage with probably HRC to do a new study to look at
I
Pathways
have a
all
question.
together.
Are you separating pathways from sidewalks?
Yes. This is to talk specifically about the pathways and not the sidewalk on 13 Mile.
These are like the inner city pathways as opposed to like the boundary sidewalks that we just talked about as the first agenda.
That could be one way to separate them. They're mostly because of the way that the engineering's been commissioned previously. We've looked at them as separate projects. We dumped a bunch of money into the engineering for the sidewalk specifically, so I felt like it was important to pull that out and look at it. But it's also a good point that they all do kind of go together.
And one of the reasons why this project has sat in this exact same state for 4 years now is one underlying theme that, with the exception of a couple areas on 13 Mile Road, are not in the equation when it comes to sidewalks, is every single one of these would require 2 residents to grant private easements
Yep.
to allow the public to traverse their property. And until someone on any one of these circles agrees, 2 owners whose properties line up agree to do so, we shouldn't spend another dime, with the exception of that project, was the only place we own an easement. And I've been saying that to the planning commission for 3 years now. If you want this to go anywhere, you need to start knocking on doors.
We do. And we need to start seeing how feasible these projects are, because what we've been chasing are a bunch of projects that aren't
After that,
feasible.
everyone along Suzanne, which is, you're only talking about the possibility of 1, 2, 3, 4, really 4 owners.
Yeah.
If they all say no, the project's done. It never starts.
Is it agreeing with compensation or agreeing without
Well,
compensation?
there could be compensation.
Because
It would
there's always
probably
a deal
more
to be
involve the
made.
landscaping and screening and visual protection and all those things they'd
Mm-hmm.
be concerned of. Would there be some nominal compensation? Maybe. I mean, if people think they're gonna get rich, probably not. I mean, it's any type of taking like that, it's gonna be a square footage of the value of their property and how many square feet we're taking, and that's how it would be compensated if you couldn't come to an agreement. But I wasn't even looking at it, these people trying to make money out of it as much as just agreeing to grant a permanent
Yeah.
easement on your property to allow strangers even
I mean, I
walk
think
through
we
your
need
property.
to, yeah, revisit it.
So
Correct.
that's what I
So,
like.
It's always just been if come, the only one that isn't is that, and 2.
And because Pathways has been shifted, you know, and planning was working on it, council ran, planning's working on it, we have paid for engineering, these are discussions on an old map, it just feels relevant to bring back up. I would say if a long-term strategy is connectivity and pathways, then doing what we can, you know, for engineering that we already have done, possibly Irving Trail, and then get commissioning a pathway study that we could utilize would be the first step. And then it would be engaging the community. Because if we don't have that connectivity portion of our pathways and we're just placing pathways, we're never a really hard time getting any outside funding, and these can get expensive. So when we're looking at this, there's lots of funding for trails and pathways, but they need to be comprehensive connectivity plans. So what I have in front of you is just kind of a hodgepodge of the conversation we've been having around planning to help us kind of frame what do we want to do with pathways, and what is the path moving forward? Because we shouldn't be engaging HRC to go knock on doors for a pathway that we don't even know that we could afford to put in or that people would be receptive to. And I think you're going to see that common theme through these. We have to engage the community. You know, we set priorities, we engage the community, and then we create our pathway forward.
I'd rather see our focus on sidewalks.
I like what David said, like, this line can move, right? Like, the minute you find 2 adjacent neighbors
The
that
line
are
goes-
willing.
yeah, the line
Yeah,
was literally
exactly,
just to
like,
show
if
that's
these
where-
2 properties, these 2 properties, these 2
Correct.
properties, and I know, I mean, right, post-COVID, like, it's a different
world, right? Like, we don't put a fence in our backyard so people can walk through it. I know where, like, Abby lives, like, they intentionally clear it so kids can go back and forth. Like, it's no longer, I don't want people using my backyard. Sometimes it's like, I love seeing the kids walk through. I've cleared a path. I put a rock structure here. I leave like a little, swing out, like sign a book. Like, it's very much a different world the past 3 years. So I would be interested to see who's moved in there and who is more open to having, this connectivity be along their property, especially if like some of the costs can go towards privacy, like you said, David, or like maintenance, some sort of natural green belt maybe, so like they don't have to, feel like someone's walking in their backyard or someone gets off track and they're like, have gone to their, back door or something.
Absolutely. So I think that, as we're framing this and moving forward, there could possibly be some budget allocations to finish up the trail on Irving. We might also want to think about some budget allocations to actually do a pathway study and see, if we want to bring those down into Franklin and then engage the residents. But don't forget that sidewalk could help connectivity in a big way too. It could be the start of a pathway and connectivity initiative. The sidewalk could be on 13 Mile, could be something we tackle first, and then we do the pathway study and continue our connectivity through the village. There are a bunch of ways to do this. I just want us to be targeted in what we're chasing and not trying to chase a little bit of everything, so that we can actually move some stuff over the finish line.
Just a question, do we have a map anywhere of easements throughout the village?
Not a comprehensive
That we
map.
have?
Not like that, no. I
Okay.
mean, we can
Because
check on
never use
individual
that as a
properties.
Criteria for pathways?
Wouldn't be able to attest to never, not in the map that was constructed
So,
here.
yeah, because I don't see anything in here that presumes that might be
Kind of
a,
like an overlay, so we
Yeah.
can look at easements versus
Yes.
connectivity points.
so,
The closest was that is, there are vacated roads in the village already where there
Yeah,
are technically easements
yeah.
reserved, like,
yeah. It would
Down
be
the
like
center
a
line.
vacated road
but
plus.
most of those
easement.
were never built because they basically sit in the middle of wetlands.
Okay, yeah, right, yeah.
So that's why they never got built in the first place, and to go back and recreate paths in those areas, I think in several of those old trail, things like
Yeah.
that, they don't really get us anywhere.
Well, for example, one of the targeted areas is around off of 14 Mile, and we do have an easement there, just south of the condo development on 14 Mile Road. I would just think it would be useful to know where that is, because it's either a barrier or it's a factor that might prompt us to look more carefully at that location for a pathway. Just a thought.
So if we had a specific spot, we can obviously always check for easements, but it's important to know that there is no GIS mapping of the village that shows infrastructure, there is no comprehensive easement. Those are things we've gotten proposals before from HRC on. They're very expensive projects, and definitely something maybe we would think about in the future, but that kind of record doesn't necessarily exist. However, if we were in a targeted area, of course, within that area, we could take a look at easements.
Okay, thanks.
So if we're kind of good on that, I'm gonna move next to municipal water, so we can skip this one, Dana. Municipal water comes up all the time in the discussion. I'm continually asked what it would cost, or hear, oh, we'd love municipal water. So what I have for you is in 2022, next slide, Dana. HRC did a cost estimate from you since then, and adjusting for where we're at now, it's about a 14% increase. To bring municipal water to the villages would be upwards of $74 million, on average $53,000 per property. Definitely not something that we could obtain or accomplish in the next year. It is something that we're always looking for funding. It could be an initiative that gets prioritized, especially as water infrastructure is becoming a priority for the state. If funding was available, that would be a good time to reconsider. But right now, the cost is just not something that we would be able to secure funding for or support. And then the next slide, Dana. And the last thing that I'll mention is that we did do a water survey with HRC in 2021, and at that time, more than half of the respondents were satisfied with their current water supply. So if we were to bring up this and make it a priority again, I'd want to engage the public, because we don't want to be spending an investment when more than half of our residents are happy with what they have. So it's a common theme in all of these. We need to be engaging the community before we get so far on things. But that's water. That's there just as information. I know it comes up a lot. I get asked a lot. That's the last information we have on that.
Mike, can we talk about that real
Yeah.
quick? This would have to go to a vote, correct? Or not necessarily?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I know when I was knocking doors, this came up so much. And a lot of the people that were in support of it were, I just wanted to go for a vote. Like, maybe I'm just the only one. You know, like, they weren't, unreasonably like, how can anyone like well water? It was just like, I just want to know. I know it's been tossed around the past 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. And what the study did show is certain places like their in Franklin like their water better than others. You know, so there's like pockets of streets that say like our water always tastes really bad and I have to get the iron filter and I have the reverse osmosis, and then other streets are saying, you know, we love our water. And so I think it would be worth going to a vote, you know.
We wouldn't have anything to put for a vote. We don't have any funding, we don't have any plan, I don't have any, we would have to say,
We have to be a vote for. a
Would we
bond.
identify
Yeah,
funding
for a
even if
bond.
we didn't want to do it though?
The funding would be a bond.
It would be-
There's no funding. Nobody's gonna give us
Yeah.
$75 million to put in
so
a bond.
it would be, we could,
So,
The vote wouldn't be for a bond or for a millage. I'm just saying, do we want water? Should we start exploring, like when they redo the roads, do we want to put some infrastructure in there to prepare ourselves for water? Like, is that even on people's radar? Is there an appetite for it, is what I'm trying to say?
that's a good question, so it's not a vote though, that's
Yeah.
not a ballot question, that's what I'm talking about, engaging the community. We could put out another community survey, we could work with HRC to go do more in-depth community engagement around that. That's not a vote on a ballot though, because there isn't anything there. I wouldn't even I would not recommend as your administrator
I guess
putting
this
that
is
on your
where-
Fairly
ballot.
simple. I mean, you're gonna go for a $75 million bond, and you have whatever number you're using to take 52 to get to 47. So take that same number, divide it by 75.
Yep,
Imagine you're gonna add 6% interest onto that on an annual basis, and then take that and divide it by what, maybe a 15-year bond? So you're talking $110 million, $100 million per house, I mean, $100,000 per household, divided over 15 years. So if you're prepared to either write one big check or have your taxes go up $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 just to have water,
the other
But-
thing we could
Well, we don't.
consider
Isn't this like
is,
sidewalks though? Like there's funding available?
no,
There's no funding available.
No.
well,
we-
our whole sidewalk project is $7 million, and this is $70 million.
We
So
just
there's
received
probably
a
different fundings
large-
available there.
we just received a large water infrastructure grant that we got in 2021, and that's what we exhausted to do the drainage study and to make the improvements that we did. These have to be started, I mean, I couldn't possibly see state money, but most of the time this is federal money, and it's not a fundable project right now.
And we could maybe get state money to help in some of the major connections, if we're gonna have to, I mean, we've already determined to get water to the village, we have to reach out to 4 different municipalities and make deals with them.
Yep.
We gotta make a deal with Bingham to bring it under Telegraph, we gotta make a deal with Bloomfield to bring it under 14, we gotta make a deal with Farmington to bring it under Inkster, to make a deal with Southfield to bring it up Franklin Road.
So it's a huge project. You could allocate resources to do more community engagement, do another water survey. That could be something. You could think about, I don't know,
From a practical standpoint, it's gonna be almost impossible, because we're not gonna get the support to do a blanket $75 million lay down the water. It's gonna have to be done like a lot of cities have
Yeah,
done over the
gradual.
years. Special assessment districts.
an
For
SAD.
small areas.
Yep.
And then as one area does an SAD, you now have a new connection point for the next area to do an SAD. Maybe the village kicks in or gets some grant money to run main trunk lines like up 14 Mile Road, make the connections, like I said, under the main roads, do those bore and jacks. We can maybe get funding for that, and then once it gets to our side of the village, it's gonna have to be little neighborhoods. An SAD requires 51% of the owners in the SAD. It requires someone to create the district and get 51 of those homeowners to vote in favor of it, and then they can create their own little. So if there's areas of the village that really need water, they could
That
go
could-
out on their own and do that.
They could, absolutely, I think that's another
But
good
to-
point,
Every
right?
single time we brought this to the, at least twice in my
Yeah.
living here, it wasn't even close. And most things usually don't fail around here, and they weren't even
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in the.
But just, let me throw this out, just for, just to think about. One is, I do think we should set aside some good time to talk about water.
Mhm.
You know, instead of a quickie part of
Yeah.
the hour and a half. I'd like to know how confident you are in that $75 million number.
Pretty confident.
And secondly, I think the, to your point, David, the approach we use, or how, some plan that talks about how we want to go about this. You talked about connecting with 4 municipalities. Well, that is one option, and it's probably a really good option, but there are other options. And I think important is the council has looked at the different options and price tags that go with them, that we're dealing with accurate numbers, because there are people in the village who put a really high number on this to scare people. I don't know how much this costs. And what it costs depends on how you do it, right?
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is, you know, it's worth a bigger discussion where we can dive in, I think.
So, one, I'm always open to schedule a special meeting. And so at any time, if that's something that you guys want to do, we could do that and talk about water. Because there's a lot to talk about with water. The numbers these are good numbers.
Okay.
I've looked at a
You
lot of
feel like
different
they are,
studies.
okay.
I went all the way back.
I'm concerned that $75 million is a number that that was pulled out of, it was a multiplication, but using a bad number from HRC, and it was intended. I just don't have a lot of, if you
Nope.
say I'm confident, well, that takes me a little further.
Definitely, when I even looked at the 2022 cost
Uh-huh.
analysis that was
Yeah.
provided by HRC, that tracks. I knew right away that it was low and that things have increased since
Okay.
then. But nothing in here looks,
Might be low, but their quantities aren't.
yeah, and I don't,
hope that they did their engineering correctly.
and this
Just
looks
many
really
real feet
reasonable.
and-
Like
Okay.
comparatively, it is just an incredibly expensive venture. I mean, and that's why you see this, like,
Sure.
where we have these areas.
You
So-
can trust HRC for the left side of the chart,
Yeah.
not necessarily the right side of the
Yeah.
chart. That's not their business. They
Yeah.
have clients that work in those business. The left side of the chart, that's their business. They've engineered it, and they're telling us, you know, you need 18,000 lineal feet of 12-inch and 112, I mean, that's vetted out.
So, Meg,
And
something
then
that's,
you're just putting a factor, you're putting a
Yeah, because I,
factor, a 14% factor on using 2022
Okay,
numbers.
I can live with that, but as we talk about water, it's money and a couple of other factors
sure.
that have driven, that one of which drove us to commissioning this study, and that was risk. You know, when I would talk to Roger about, Roger, what if something, a catastrophe occurred? What's the plan B if there's a section of the village that suddenly is without water, like downtown? What is, and he said he thought we had one. Well, it was in his head, but, you know, he'd been thinking about it. I think this is a disaster planning issue. And I also think it's and I think the factor that we need to look at is how safe is our water supply for the next period of time, maybe it's 10 or 15 years, where that we've used as a road repair cycle, which is coming up again in another 6, 8 years, that would be a time to look at, if we're ripping up the road, should we do other things? Should we be looking at putting in water infrastructure? We crossed that path, or we went down that path when we timed the construction on Franklin Road, because there was some pressure for some members of the council. It's ripped up, let's put a water main in, or let's do this or that. We didn't do that, so that cycle's coming up again. But one thing that we never we heard about, we talked about, is the safety of our groundwater because of the strip mall across the street. And we've got monitoring in place, but it's a Band-Aid. That's my spiel.
It's all a good point, and it shows that we need a special time to talk about water. I think let's not forget that you've just invested in a lot of water infrastructure over the last 2 years. Over $500,000 went into stormwater
Yeah.
drainage, to making sure that we have safety in our water, and the concerns that we were facing a couple of years ago are not the concerns that we have now with water. So our water is very safe. We did make a huge investment into our water and into our stormwater infrastructure over the last few years. And that a work session to go over that is necessary. But for me as an administrator, we've cleaned up a lot of safety concerns we had when we were doing our infrastructure work or spending $500,000 to work on that before. The fact now our well water it is safe to consume. And so I guess if this was a council priority, I would want to know what we wanted to do with it, how much money we wanted to allocate, and what direction we wanted to move forward with it.
That's fair. I just want to make sure this is bigger than this is more than a money issue.
Yeah, that would be a huge problem. I mean, I can't even think of how long it would take to bring water in here. We're talking 5 years. I mean, you can't just rip everything up at one time. Then you would get all the way back instantly. I'm like, we don't have any GIS mapping of any of our infrastructure underground, so that probably would have to take place first. That's about $100,000 investment. So like you're saying, there's a ton of components that
It's
would need to
complicated,
go into that. I'm not chasing city water. It's been out in a survey. It's, it did go to a vote of the people like 10 years ago and was put down. If council would like to see direction in there, we need to know what you'd like to do with it, what that direction would look like, and how much money we would allocate resource-wise over there. Because right now, when I'm looking at our next year, there's nothing to be done to bring municipal water in the next year down here.
Pam, the area that you're talking about probably would be the easiest of all the areas in the village to serve.
It's
It's
the
got
it's the
water
part of the
right
village
there.
with 30 feet,
Water's
30-foot
right there at
wells.
14 and Franklin.
That's right. It is specifically down there.
And you only
yeah.
have to get it a little shot up
Yeah.
Franklin to service the downtown
Yeah.
and the historic district. And beyond that, yeah, I mean, I lived on a house that had a 45-foot well and it was full of contaminants. And then you
Yeah.
put a new well that goes into that 120-foot aquifer and it's a completely different story.
Well, and the other factor that's kind of a squishy one, but we've got new businesses, we've got a restaurant coming in. And I would not be surprised if that business and other businesses coming in that are food related will come to you and say, I can't run my equipment because this water is so
You're
bad.
absolutely right.
And they will put pressure on us.
That is a reason which transitions to economic development, which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah,
which has always been at the top of the radar,
Yeah.
is getting it to downtown, which is
Yeah.
where the contamination is and where we have the shallow wells and where we have businesses that their existence is in a way tied into
Yeah.
water, particularly a restaurant.
that's all I
There are
just
certain
wanted on
drinks
the
and,
table
you know,
as
now you gotta
a,
have all special water
Yeah.
systems to,
yeah.
so, yeah, I guess that would be the starting point.
I think SADs are you know, a special assessment district seems like the most reasonable way to tackle that, but again, so that's just there because it comes up a lot, and $75 million isn't a number that I can move around, so that's not a priority for me here right now until it is, you know. That a lot of this isn't just about money, it is about staff time and resources and about what we can reasonably accomplish in the next year. But to Pam's point, extensive capital planning needs to happen here, and that's been something that we haven't ever really had a good capital plan, and we haven't ever really funded that very well. Those are things that we're gonna be working towards. That takes a lot of time, and that's not something that was feasible for this budget cycle, but it will be for next budget cycle. And things like municipal water are great. You know, GIS mapping of our infrastructure are great. Those are projects that should be focused around a capital plan when we have the capacity to go ahead and do that. Next slide, Dana.
Real quick.
Yep,
So what we know, water will always be expensive, right?
yep,
So we can just slide that to the side. I think what would be helpful for me or a policymaker would be timing is equally important, right? So now may not be the best time, grant funding's not available. Same thing, like we ripped up the roads and it was like, throw a pipe down.
right.
Does that mean anything? Is there cost savings to that? What is the cost of that? Because if it's like every time we lift up a road, we put down a pipe. And it's like we're doing gradual infrastructure build out so that when a decision is made, some of that cost has already been accounted for. So we're not tearing up the road to put in the pipe. And so I think from a policy perspective, that is more what I would be looking for direction on. So it's not like can we get the village to commit $74 million today? It's like, how can we over time plan for it?
I like that, and I think that really falls into the idea of next year, not 25, 26, the next cycle having a capital improvement plan, because that would go on there. And a lot of municipalities do that, you know, maybe there's not water here yet, but since we're gonna pave this road, let's lay all of the utilities that we're gonna need, and then they'll be here. I would not recommend any of that until we had mapped what's already in the village and we're keeping track of what we're doing. And so I would say that would probably be the first step in that priority. But I agree. I think that, you know, in the long term, are we making shifts and planning for that to eventually be a possibility? That can be very different than do we have $75 million right now to do that? And I would envision that being part of a capital improvement plan as it relates to infrastructure for
To
sure.
Trustee Sally's point, could we direct the planning commission to do that instead of like the one-off ordinance projects? Like, this is what we want to know, and it will take a lot of time investment, so can that be like your ongoing project for the year?
It'd be really difficult for them. We'd need engineers. So really would be HRC engagement. And that would, because they're our contractor, I would probably want to oversee that. Also, I think that it falls into these big budget questions that are more, that's a little out of scope of planning.
Okay.
But we could, things that wouldn't cost a lot on water, we could engage the residents again. We could ask again how people feel about water and get new numbers on that. We could, you know, engage with HRC to start showing us what we would need to do to get infrastructure mapped down here so that these type of things would be possible. Like, those would be things that we could do, but we would be paying our consultant, our engineer to do those
Yeah.
things.
I want to try to like leverage the governance bodies we have and
Yes.
give them direction on like strategic visions instead of like, let's do the burn ordinance, let's do the lighting ordinance. It's like, let's look holistically at this. Like, in 3 years, we want to know this. Let's start
Yes.
working towards that. So it's more like strategic, long-term, and contributes towards moving the needle.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I can see other things that would
Okay.
be good assignments for planning
Okay.
commission. And now that we took pathways back, they're gonna need that, you know, to help focus that. So I hear your point. I think water infrastructure is a little bit above their pay grade, but there are things that we could take
mean-
over there.
Their volunteer grade.
All right, so I'm just gonna fly through, I got two more here. One, economic development, continued focus and priority for the village, has been for a while. I have it on here because I don't want us to lose sight of it. We have some exciting things that we're working on right now, and I want us to frame, you know, the initiatives and the amount of time and resources that they're taking. So right now, Susan has been doing a really great job. Pam has been working with her, and they've been really focused on growth and revitalization, especially as it pertains to the Village Green. We are looking at that Village Green as a center for this community, and so they have established a community task force, which is talking about just visioning right now, brainstorming. What do we want to see with the green? What kind of projects could we get ready? We know that there could potentially be funding for these projects, but they have to be shovel ready. So in order for the project to be shovel ready, it could involve an investment from the village to go ahead and do some engineering or some planning or to get a project that's shovel ready. So the following attachments that you have under your economic development, I'm not going to go over them too much. I'll have you review them on your own, but they speak to this collaborative effort that's happening right now to program the green between all of these different groups. So we have a site plan of the green, and then we have an overview of the Krieger Barn, and it's an underutilized historic space right now. What would it take to get the Krieger Barn up and going, possibly being, concessions for a ball field or whatever. We're in this initial visioning section of this initiative, but what I think is important and what I'm trying to communicate here is economic development continues to be a really important goal for us over here in the office. I think programming this beautiful green space that we have as our community gathering space to continue to invest in that and provide resources for our community is a priority. Doing those things could have a cost associated with them, such as having a shovel-ready project and how much funding that would take. And then once we have a shovel-ready project, now we're ready to go secure outside funding. Programming the green would be an expensive endeavor, especially in this collaborative effort we're discussing, but there is funding available for all types of things like that. So it would be important that we had actual projects that could be funded, and right now we don't. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of separate groups that have priorities. We do not have a project that I would feel comfortable taking to just instantly, be able to demonstrate what kind of funding we needed. So you're gonna have some proposals, you're gonna have some background on the barn, one from the baseball league. We've been working with, FCA has joined this group. We have this great young entrepreneurs and makers proposal that would all fit into programming of the barn. So I don't think there's a ton that we need to dive into today on this, but I can answer questions. I just want to frame it as, this is definitely something that we spend time and resources on as a staff, and if we want to move it forward, it will eventually require funding.
It looks like on page 54 for the Franklin Church proposal, and it's great detail, by the way, but it looks like the steps and costs portion of this, it goes right into the Franklin baseball and softball.
Oh,
Proposal.
they had updated that came from them.
Okay.
So they had updated that plan and switched it. I wonder if they didn't
Okay.
include that in there. Okay, well, we can circulate that from them. They updated that, I know, after we had the packet, so we'll look at that. I don't know if it's in there or if they had just missed that, but.
What is your timeline for posting the economic development position? Because I'd like to see that hired like sooner rather than later, so we know how much the salary is, so we can include it in the budget cycle to make sure like we don't have to do amendments and all that
100%.
stuff.
So it's on there. I do think that the possibility of bringing back a full-time economic development Main Street director could be a good avenue for us. It's something that we'll talk about in finance committee meetings, in people committee meetings. It would be something that we would write into our budget, this coming budget, so that we were able to hire for it.
Okay, so it couldn't be posted now since,
Not without a budget amendment, I would need direction from council. I
Okay.
don't have the funds available to pay anyone for that position. It wasn't budgeted last year. That's not how it's structured. So, if we'd like to do that,
that would have to be in like the one that we approved for July 1st, right?
Yep,
The budget that was
yep,
set July 1st.
yeah, or it could be something that we approve, a budget amendment, say to have a salary of like 65 to 70, I think would be fair there. And, and then we could have a budget amendment for this year. But otherwise, my goal is to use it to frame these conversations, to bring that into our smaller committees, and to see what we would have to do to have that actually written into the budget that we would approve right
Okay.
here in the summer. Okay, Next, and probably what I would deem from my perspective, the most important goal for the next year, Dana, I'll take the next slide there, is moving into the possibility of a public safety millage. So we know that we have a revenue issue on our hands and that we have to look for ways to generate some more revenue. You can skip that one, Dana. Oh, sorry, I skipped one here. I'm gonna just fly through this slide. You can read it on your own time. We've been talking a lot about municipal communications. It is a priority over here. We have a number of initiatives that we're on. I have it here just to help frame. This is something we're working on this next year. As far as budget constraints, I'm not seeing a lot that we will need to pull apart and budget in order to make a lot of our communication goals happen. So a lot of this is already in the works. So I don't think this has any real big budget implications. Yes.
These sections look like the headers of your communications plan to me.
Yes. Yep.
Right now, my understanding is that municipal communications is handled with a contractor directed by you and Susan.
To some extent,
Are-
our contractor doesn't do all of our
Okay,
communications.
so my question for a budgeting standpoint is, do you have a plan in mind for continuing with contracted services or bringing on an employee?
If I
Or
were
you're
to.
not there yet?
Yeah, no, I have a plan. Like, if I was going to bring on an employee, I want an economic development director. I think we would see a lot more use in that, and that would be an actual staff person that I would see as multifaceted. They would provide a lot of relief to the strains that we have in personnel over here right now. So my priority for this next year would not be to bring on a full-time communications person or even a part-time necessarily, because from my perspective, and of course we can dive deeper into that in our smaller committees, but would be to prioritize an economic development director and then keep with a contractor. What contractor, that would be up for us to decide, and we have a presentation tonight from our communications contractor, so we'll dive into a lot more of the work that's being done right now at our next meeting. So if we can just get to our last little bit here, public safety millage. So public safety millage, really a police millage, but possibly public safety millage as we open up and look at some of the requirements for a fire department. I just have some general information for you here. So the goal tonight is not to give you exact numbers, but I can say that about $1 million a year from our general fund goes directly over to the police department to help support that. In the past, not only does that limit the amount of money that we're able to invest in projects outside of this police department, but it was sustainable in a way that it is not anymore. So within the next 2 to 3 years, we need to find some sort of revenue solution. And I'm not saying that this is the only path forward. I am just presenting this as an option. I would like council to start thinking about going to the voters for possibly a public safety millage. And if that is something we're going to talk about in the next year, Dana, can I get the next slide there? We need to be really cognizant of the amount of time from staff that it will take to effectively engage a community, to educate everyone on the needs, to be able to be transparent, sharing information, to be showing up and talking to our communities in the ways that we should. It would be almost a full-time job in itself to get everybody up and ready to go for this. We need some sort of solution in the next 3 years. If we were going to agree to move on a public safety millage, it would be something that I would want to work on sooner rather than later, given the extreme budget constraints that we have right now. Last slide there, Dana. I think there's one more, maybe not. Nope, that's it. So this just breaks it down. What you have here is just framing it. I'm framing on the toppest level, the highest level, the amount of work that we would need to put in to effectively do that. It does not get down into numbers. We're not there yet. Those are finance committee meetings first. But when we're talking about how you want myself as your administrator to prioritize my next year, this would be an important thing. If this is a priority, this will take an incredible amount of my time to get through successfully. Yes.
So the net of it is, we have to do something, like that's not an option. This is probably the best path forward to address this, not the only option, but
Correct.
something has to be done.
So, when I look at this issue, I see it kind of twofold. The first one is whether or not we should split out the public safety millage away from our general fund, right? And that's
Yeah.
just a net zero, that's net zero.
Yeah,
And then the next question is, that gives more visibility into residents to say, I do in fact want an increase of my public safety millage, right? So my only concern, and I think it's a great idea and support it, is that if we couple those two issues together, we may get an outcome that the village may support separating into a public safety millage, but not support an increase in our overall millage. And therefore, we could unintentionally shoot down that public safety millage existing on its own. So that's just a policy thing for us to
I
consider.
don't follow that, I'm sorry.
Okay, so if we say we are bringing forward, because it's gonna take a vote in order to separate out the public safety millage, correct? We couldn't just say,
It needs to go vote.
right, it would have to go to the vote of the village.
To
In-
create the public safety millage.
Correct. And so what we would be doing then is offsetting what they're currently paying is just the village's millage over into the public safety and additionally ours, right? So that would come to the public as a net zero. However, if we then came to them instead with an increase on, let's say, the village's overall millage,
Which I'm not suggesting.
okay, that's what I wanna make sure.
Oh, no,
Yes.
so in order to not increase, we already did a Headley roll-up. I would not suggest a general operating millage at that time, and I wouldn't necessarily, now, we've got numbers to dive into, but at this point, I wouldn't suggest an increase in that millage. I would suggest bringing forward a new independent public safety millage that would then just, by default,
Look at it in simple terms. It's $1 million, okay? So we're gonna have to add $1 million. So if we take $1 million, whatever that equates to, 1.3 mils, that are already being used up in the general fund, and move it to on its own, that's your net zero
Yeah.
gain.
yep,
And now we're still at ground zero, but we have this extra $1 million in the
Yes.
general fund. Well, we don't need an extra $1 million to play
Nope.
with. We could arguably tell our residents, we don't need to draw the full 3.5, which is now already back down to close to 3.4.
yep.
In the 3 years of heavy rollback, and then we would not have to take all of that. We'd still maybe use a couple $100,000 of it
Great.
to move forward. So it would.
Lower.
Instead of being.
No, that's not what I'm saying though, because you're still increasing people's taxes.
Yeah, the taxes are gonna have to go up.
But
no
my
matter what.
point is
And I
you're
don't know how you-
coupling two separate issues that could then result in shooting down, moving the public safety millage into its own thing.
So what would the alternative be?
To
Just
start out
increasing
at
the
net zero.
It's just increasing the general fund?
No, so that whatever you would move the millage over to public safety, you would deduct from the general.
We've discussed that as possible.
But
The
we'd
problem
still be out
is,
money by 29.
yeah,
I understand that. I am saying that from a policy perspective, if you go to the voters and you say that we are separating out these millages, but oh, by the way, in doing so, you're increasing your taxes, you may get the public to say, no, I do not support it, and then what do we say? Where do we go from there? Do we interpret the vote of the people to say
Come back
they
again
don't
next
want
year.
the separation of the millages, or they don't want an increase in taxes?
it's only one millage. I don't understand the
It's
separation of the millages.
So-
I'm proposing a separate public
No,
safety
what he's
millage.
saying is, if we, I mean, I don't know how you could do what you're saying, because we already have our other millage amount. We're not gonna go and ask to reduce the amount of mills that we can draw on our 3.5. So I'm not sure what you're suggesting is to this shift, this net zero shift.
So,
We can't just create a separate, can we create a separate fund that just put all the money, what you're saying is, the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
When whatever money that we've decided comes from the taxes.
Right.
To go to the police department, we just put that in a fund. I mean, isn't that what we do right now?
I guess I'm struggling to understand then what the proposal is, because what I am saying is that the voters would vote on the public safety millage, which would then become the police budget. And if it's the fire budget too, it's the fire budget too, right? That comes out of the general fund right now. So in order for us to have that separate millage, the voters have to pay, they have to vote on that.
Yes,
Now, we're saying that we're gonna keep their other millage The exact same?
Well, their other millage is never the exact same because it reduces every year.
Sure, put that aside, right? I see that as the
I hear
logistical
what you're
thing.
saying.
That's what we're saying, but then we're also, could tell them that if you trust us, we don't need to draw the entire full other millage.
We could
We could-
roll that, like,
We could
without rolling
use
it back.
less, and we could draw less.
You can file a 4029 and just say we're gonna leverage less than our full 3.5 or 3.4 that we're allowed to. But I think that also it's important to note that if we do, what we have right now isn't a bait and switch because it's not sustainable. If we don't bring in more revenue, we won't have a government or we won't have a police department in the next 4 years. So it's not like we are sustainable, but then we're splitting it out so that now that they can have their own direct revenue source and now we have this other one. It's that by 2029, if we don't figure out a way to bring in more revenue, we won't have any, the whole thing will be bankrupt and we won't be able to afford a government or a police department.
Then, again, I know this is something we've had a community, like, then we have to have a heck of a presentation, right?
Oh.
Because most people are gonna say, I wanna know exactly what you've done to solve the problem outside of just increase my taxes. And I know that
Yep.
should
Well,
go
yeah,
without
it'll be a
stating,
simple-
but
It's gonna be a simple comparison. We're gonna take what our millage, we're gonna take a standard house at a whatever average taxable value rate in our village, and then we're gonna have Meg do a comparison of what that same house would pay in taxes in every single one of the communities around us, and that's how we're gonna
But
have to
that's-
It's not the same.
that's
I
not
go
the
to
same.
Farmington Hills.
No,
I
hang
ask
on,
for it.
hang on.
I go to Bloomfield Hills.
I understand that, but if we freed up money in our general fund now, then we could start adding services to the village of Franklin.
I think the most important thing here is that community engagement is the most important priority for me as an administrator when putting forward a millage. And on the last page there, I have a very brief outline of a community engagement plan, but it takes, in my head, 8 months to successfully engage a community and to educate them through different resources to show why this is needed, what the consequences of not going forward with any revenue solution are, and how all of the math works out. I mean, it's not, we've never seen it done here in the village before. It's not just a Facebook post or one town hall or one meeting at a council meeting. It's an entire movement where we're going, where it's a collaborative effort with police, where we're talking specifically about the implications of not having, a new revenue source. Also, I'm for sure open to suggestions. I take this position knowing that by 2029, this government is bankrupt and you can't pay any of our salaries anymore. So this so far is the best solution that I have because it causes the largest strain on our general fund. We could be open to something else. What we know is we have a revenue and not necessarily an expense issue. We need to figure out how to solve that issue by 2029.
So since we're 4 minutes from the start of the meeting,
Yep.
I wonder if we could just agree to stop now. And we are going to be having a couple more meetings to look at budget issues.
Yep,
Can we bring this back
absolutely.
at a future workshop? Because I think we're not yet together on what it is we're trying to do and how to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for framing that and wrapping it up. I wasn't expecting us to make decisions tonight. This was a seminar. We're just educating. So I would ask that you take your packets home and you read through them throughout the next couple of weeks before our next special meeting. If you have questions, please email me. We are going to be very responsive with compiling answers because the goal would be when we come back to our next find a special meeting to talk about budget, we can have a deliberation about what the priorities are next year.
Great.
All right.
Thank you. Nice job.
Thank you.
That was great, man.